After months of escalating trade tensions, China and the United States agreed to temporary cuts in tariffs. Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. China and the United States announced a series of tariff adjustments between the world's two largest economies. The agreement to lower tariffs for 90 days on each other's goods came after a weekend of high-stakes talks in Geneva, focusing on economic and trade issues. CGTN's Ken Brown has more in this report.
On Saturday, the Chinese and U.S. delegation sat down to talks for the first time since the U.S. administration began imposing hefty tariffs on Chinese goods that would escalate to a tit-for-tat tariff war. The Chinese Foreign Ministry stated that the Geneva talks were initiated by the United States, leading to 2 days of negotiations led by Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. On Monday, positive outcomes emerged.
The two sides held in-depth exchanges on trade and economic issues of their respective concern. The atmosphere of the meeting was candid, in-depth and constructive. The meeting achieved substantial progress and reached important consensus.
Most experts were expecting a de-escalation and a starting point for further talks, but what we got was much more dramatic, a 115% lifting of tariffs. A joint statement announced that effective Wednesday, the U.S. is slashing duties on Chinese products to 30% from 145%, while Beijing is dropping its levy on most goods to 10%. These terms will continue for at least 90 days while the two sides pursue additional negotiations. The U.S. delegation led by Bessent repeated that the U.S. does not want to decouple from China.
We've identified 5 or 6 strategic industries and supply chain vulnerabilities, and we will continue moving toward U.S. independence or reliable supplies from allies on those. But the consensus from both delegations this weekend is neither side wants a decoupling. And what had occurred with these very high tariffs, as Ambassador Greer said, was the equivalent of an embargo, and neither side wants that. We do want trade. We want more balanced trade.
He Lifeng also restated that China's position towards this trade war is very clear, that China does not want to fight one because there are no winners in a trade war. But he reiterated that if the U.S. insists on forcing this upon China, then Beijing would not be afraid to fight to the end. The weekend talks in Geneva, however, ended on a positive note of reconciliation, with the world's two biggest economies beginning to negotiate a new path in a world undergoing changes unseen in a century. Ken Brown, CGTN, Geneva.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Sourabh Gupta is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-America Studies. Qiang serves as the Assistant Director for Renmin University's International Monetary Institute. Also with us is James P. Moore. He heads the Washington Institute for Business, Government and Society. And Liang is a Chair Professor in Economics at Willamette University. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Liang, let me start with you. So we've had this first round of talks that took place in Geneva, long-awaited negotiations. A joint statement was released, and the top line is that for Chinese imports into the United States, tariffs will be cut from 145% to 30%. What is your assessment? How significant is this?
Well, good to be with you, Anand. So I think definitely this is a progress between the two countries when it comes to their trade, issues. The long, sort of escalation, as you stated, from the Trump 1.0 to now. So I think this is a positive step towards the right direction. But that said, I think there's still many thorny issues that need to be fixed. So as you mentioned, the 30%, in fact, including the previous 2 rounds of fentanyl related the tariffs, the 20%, and then this 10% universal, that's 30%. But then plus some of these Section 301 and Section 232 tariffs that were imposed back in 2018, and also the current, the tariffs on the steel and aluminum and all of that, I think it would still push the effective tariff rate from the U.S. on China to about 41%. And so I think that is still quite high. And the budget lab of the Yale University has calculated the number, and their estimate is that will still reduce China's share of the U.S.'s exports from the current 14% to about 6%. So I think, there's still a lot more negotiations going to take place in that 90 days of truce. And so there are issues, like I mentioned, the fentanyl related. I'm actually quite surprised because Wang Xiaohong, the security czar, was at the trade negotiation in Geneva, but nothing seemed to really, progress on that front. So that, I think, still remains to be seen what would happen. And of course, there are also other non-tariff trade barriers that both countries do need to work on. China's, ban and restrictions on some of the rare earth minerals to the U.S. Even though, the real says China will need to suspend or cancel some of these countermeasures, but those were only applied to after April the 4th. And so there are all these other restrictions that are earlier, back in 2023 and 2024. So that is still remain to be seen. And of course, the U.S.'s restrictions on the high-tech exports to China, that is another thorny issue that both sides need to work out.
Right, Liang. Still lots of challenges ahead, as you point out, but the two sides appear to have established some basis for future talks. The Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, he also talked about the establishment of an economic and trade consultation mechanism. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The two sides agreed on establishing a consultation mechanism for trade and economic issues, identify the lead persons on each side, and will carry on further consultations relating to trade and economic issues of their respective concerns.
So, Liang, how important will this be in mitigating future trade issues?
Well, I think these kinds of candid and ongoing constructive dialogues are definitely important. But at the same time, I think both sides need to set their expectations correct. I think you heard Donald Trump saying something, according to the Bloomberg report, that they said that China is going to open the market. They're going to be fully open. And he said something along the lines, I think this is going to be good, going to be great for, quote, unification and peace. So it's not clear exactly what he's saying there, but my concern is hopefully these kinds of trade talks will really stick to that economic realm and not to politicize any of the issues. And also, I'm also hoping that Trump will be, credible, not to kind of demand anything that is unreasonable from China's perspective. And of course, I think, there remain many, as I mentioned, the issues in terms of the trade imbalances, in terms of all these tech restrictions and so on and so forth. So I think these communications are helpful, but it remains to be seen. This could be a long and drawn out and also bumpy process going forward.
James, great to have you with us in the studio.
Indeed.
President Trump called this agreement a total reset of relations with China. In the immediate aftermath, we saw stock markets rally across the world, including here in the United States. How should this deal be viewed by U.S. consumers?
Well, first of all, I think we need to remember that when President Trump was first in office, that we had two of these 90-day periods in which the trade relationship between China and the United States took place. So this is nothing new or novel. I think that we need to recognize the fact that the United States needs to fully appreciate what the situation has been over the past 40 years when I first began to be involved with China, as to what the stakes are. It's amazing when you recognize the fact that 4 decades ago, that the two-way trading relationship between our countries was literally $6 billion. Today, it is closer to $600 billion. And so clearly, China has done a great deal in being able to help to dominate the world market in so many ways, in so many different avenues, that the United States is finally trying to put a stop to it. But I think it's also clear that it's important to recognize that tariffs will not be ultimately the answer to the issues that are facing China and the United States. Rather, I think dealing with with supply chain management or diplomacy is going to be key. The United States has dwindled in terms of its manufacturing capability, much heavier in services today, but they're going to have to come up with new ways to be able to accommodate consumers here and overseas.
There was an economist, is an economist, I should say, at Harvard University, James, Danny Roderick is his name. He says that tariffs, even at 30%, are still high and will hurt U.S. consumers. Roderick says Trump has obtained absolutely nothing from China for all the chaos that he generated. Does he have a point?
I think he does have a point. I think President Trump would disagree, but the fact remains is that the tariffs in and of themselves are not going to be the ultimate answer to the questions and the concerns that we have.
Qiang, good to see you. You know, these talks were followed by the world because the entire world's been affected by these tariffs, and of course the entire world's been affected by trade relations between China and the United States as well. According to the IMF, China and the U.S. account for 40% of global GDP. So how important was this adjustments? How important were these adjustments in tariffs? And how important is the overall trade relationship between these two countries for the rest of the world?
Well, I think it is a very important question. Because this kind of conflict of this type actually has been agitated every country to think about the global trade relationship, you know, against the current backdrop. Because everybody realized that if China and America cannot work out very well with each other, and the whole world probably will be impacted, as we can see from the global trade, you know, stock market and also trade relations. Everybody is, you know, been affected. For example, if you take a look at the Balkan, you know, the dry goods indexes, we'll find out the things has been turbulent all over the months since China and America has been, you know, confronting each other, and also the global stock market, and also been seeing the similar situation not only in America and China, but also in, you know, ASEAN nations, in Latin America, in the European Union. And I think everybody are fearing that this kind of the conflict will get escalating. And also, from America's side, I think they fully understand if they want to, you know, really make America great again, and also make America a major global power in the manufacturing and, you know, supply chain, they still need to work with China. And because China has the only capability to support America to recover this power and capacity, you know, to build the manufacturing and to get the job back in the United States. So, this really need to be very, very important. And also, I fully agree with the colleague here today, been saying that the 30% of the tariff is still very, very high, not only affecting China and America, but also affecting, you know, the rest of the world, because even the other countries with America under the truce about 90 days, but still nobody knows what's going to happen after 90 days. So China and America has been setting an example for them. And America has been trying to hijack China with another, you know, 20% of the punishment, the tariff out of the fentanyl. And we don't know where it's going to go after the 90 days, because 30% is still very, very high with the fentanyl issues. Who knows? After 30 days, they're going to give China some other excuses to give China some other 20% or not. And letting them know about this joint declaration, we do not know the previous like 10% of the 301 investigation are still going to be here or are already out of the picture. We don't know about that. So there's going to be huge uncertainty happening with the global supply chain. And if China cannot, you know, fully enjoy the previous tariff, you know, treatment, and then we're going to still face a lot of turmoil happening with the, you know, affiliated supply chain in Latin America, in ASEAN nations, and even affecting South Korea and Japan, because they've been already working closely under the RCEP, you know, agreement, and also in a very large extended cooperation network with China already.
Okay, Sourabh Gupta, I want to pick up on something that James was talking about a moment ago, that this is not just about tariffs, it's about a lot more. It's going to take some serious diplomacy in the months ahead to resolve the differences between the two countries. You know, the Chinese news agency Xinhua framed it in a broader way, a much more philosophical way. Xinhua said This is much more than tariffs. It is an encounter between one vision rooted in openness, cooperation and shared growth, and the other that is driven by confrontation, exclusion and zero-sum mentality. I don't have to tell you which side is which side there. But is that a fair comparison?
Yes, it is a fair comparison, and I think it's an apt comparison.
Yeah.
But I would also say that where the US and China are going to be in terms of these negotiations are going to be on the tariffs fundamentally. Because the US strategy out here is about balancing trade, reshoring manufacturing, stripping China out of important US critical infrastructure, and decoupling on advanced technologies. We are not talking in this negotiation as much on the decoupling of advanced technologies and on stripping out from critical infrastructure. That's a separate conversation which will happen over the course of this administration. But this is about tariffs and about industrial reshoring. Yeah. And I think that conversation will be that will consume all the time and energy that the two have, at least on the economic front. So while it's true that from a conceptual standpoint, this is about two very different worldviews, I think that will still stay more in the abstract rather than in actual practice among the two sides.
Well, Sourabh, as you say, it's about the balance of trade, it's about reshoring, but initially, it's about the balance of trade, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And frankly, it's not just about the balance of trade. It's pretty
reshoring is going to take time.
It's going to take time. But, you know, Scott Bessent actually, you know, Trump says all sorts of things, and so everybody gets confused. Yeah. Scott Bessent is new at this game. So fortunately, he speaks, he's more brief, but he's also to the point. And if one follows him, what the administration is aiming for with regard to China is something on the lines of the market purchases deal, the phase one deal, which they had, which Trump has brooded over ever since he left the administration. That's what we're going to try to see done in the next 90 days. And what Scott Bessent said also in terms of about reshoring, yes, that's a longer term process, but there are important industrial segments where the US wants to have its own manufacturing capability back in its own country. Yeah. And in those areas, I think they're running Section 323 investigations on autos, trucks, pharma, and that is the purpose for that. And China is unfortunately going to have to face tariffs in those sectors. Yeah.
Young Liang, you know, getting back to that report in Xinhua, it also said that the US tariff offensive amounts to economic self-harm. I mean, what kind of impact is this going to have on the Trump administration? And the other question is, you know, now that the tariff reductions have been announced, how long is it going to take to get goods moving fast again across between the two countries?
Well, so first of all, I think the U.S.'s effective average tariff rate right now is still 16.4%, which is the highest since 1937. So what that means is that, yes, the economic damages to the U.S. economy is somewhat reduced by this truce. But still, these are self-inflicted wounds. We're still talking about inflation being elevated. We're still talking about, you know, GDP real growth rate will decline just by a smaller amount. So I think these tariffs, whenever they are still remain in place, they are going to cause economic harm. The question is, what can you achieve by suffering, you know, these costs? So that goes back to the manufacturing, you know, sort of revitalization of industrial sector in the U.S. Well, I think, you know, when we look at really the numbers, if with all these tariffs and also perhaps any sort of industrial policies, if Trump is really willing to give tax cuts to businesses and so on and so forth, it might help to increase a little bit manufacturing output in the U.S. Again, according to the budget lab of the Yale University, in the long term, this will increase manufacturing output by 1.5 percentage points of GDP. But what is the cost? Well, the construction sector is going to shrink, and the farm sector, the agriculture sector is going to shrink. So I think the question is really asking what kind of manufacturing that the Trump administration really wants. Right now, I think tariff fell most heavily on textile, apparel, and shoes, and these industries. So the question is, are these really the manufacturing, you know, sectors that the U.S. wants to revitalize at the expense of construction when the U.S. is already facing housing crisis, or at the agricultural sector when, you know, Trump really relies on them for their political base? So I think those are really essential questions. And then to the question about when the trade flow will resume. As a matter of fact, I think market has already priced in. They already expected some kinds of trade truce. So according to some of the estimate, from the LA port, for example, they resume the next jump of the goods that are coming into the United States will be around May 20th. So I think that would fairly recover soon. But that said, I think it's still at a smaller scale than previously would have been. Again, because still there are a lot of uncertainties.
James, on the question of balancing trade, of course, China exports a vast amount of manufactured goods to the United States. Where is the potential for the United States to expand its exports to China?
Well, I think this is all part and parcel of what President Trump's approach has been. When you recognize, as I was mentioning earlier, that we've gone from approximately $8 billion two-way trade, which was mainly in agriculture into China and light manufacturing into the United States, and you realize how dramatically it has changed. President Trump is sitting back wondering, what are we going to do to make sure that it doesn't expand even further than what we've seen in just these past 40 years? And I think that's been foremost in their minds as they've been approaching all this. And so I think we just need to be able to find ways to use a supply chain approach diplomatically and managerially, and really try to be able to determine exactly what do we want to look like 20 and 30 years from now. For us to be dealing with just what's happening over the past few days just is not going to make it.
So what do you think is going to be happening in the future? I mean, how is this trade relationship going to evolve?
Well, I think the trade relationship is going to have to evolve in that the United States is going to have to be able to help support its companies in being able to dramatically expand certain supply chain routes. I think in the case of China, we have seen a series of initiatives that have been taken over time that have brought them to this point. Everything from the way the currency has been handled, dealing with tariff and non-tariff barriers. There's just a series of things that they've taken that the United States has not. And finally, President Trump has thrown his hands up and said, okay, enough is enough, but tariffs is not going to do it.
Qiang, China's economy expanded by 5.4% in the first 3 months of this year. And, the full tariff blow has not yet shown up in official Chinese statistics. So looking at these negotiations over the weekend, how important was it for China to strike a deal, not just the United States?
Well, I think for China, I think the leadership, according to my knowledge, is very confident, and because Chinese economy showed a great resilience in the past 5 years. I don't think, we don't think, this kind of the tariff conflict has been the most serious impact towards Chinese economy in the near history. So for China, striking this deal is very important, as we just mentioned. This trade partnership is very important for both sides. But I don't think this is the uttermost urgent issue currently, because if you take a look at the American trade with China, the total size is about $500 billion US, and Chinese trade surplus is about 370 or at most $400 billion US. And this is already ranking less than the number 3 among Chinese foreign trade. And also, if you understand the trade sheer size in Chinese GDP is also less than the 20%. So I think while with America's partnership with this smooth and close working partnership in trade and economy, I think China would really love it. But if it's perfectly gone, it's 100% gone, like Mr. Besant has mentioning. If the really decoupling is happening, I think China is going to be okay with that. So I don't think this is everybody's guessing. Okay, your CPI has been dropping and it's slowing down. Okay, we've been going through worse moment than this. So I think that's a reason why for Mr. Besant they've been initiating this talk. And I think it's okay. And according to my knowledge, Mr. Besant fully understands rebalancing American economy and expanding, manufacturing is, top priority. So I think that's the signal that we got from America's side.
Okay. So on this question of decoupling, I want to get back to that, the two economies decoupling. Scott Besant told the United States Business News channel, CNBC, that there are now specific elements of decoupling that are in place that are vital to U.S. strategic interests. It's what you were telling us about earlier on, sort of the supply chain issues on key materials. But in another statement, as we heard in our report, he said neither side wants a decoupling. It seems to be contradictory statements. Is it just terminology, or what does it mean?
It sounds contradictory, but let me try to frame this a little differently.
Yeah.
Framing decoupling in terms of can be framed as a negative list, as in we do trade in everything except these particular sectors. Yeah. And those particular sectors where he says he wants to decouple are sectors which are unfortunately growing sectors, advanced sectors, but the ones in which he does want to do that decoupling. The Biden administration had started this process in information communication technology and services, in data, and in other
it's mainly
areas.
tech.
And clean energy, yeah. But also the Trump administration also wants to bring industrially salient sectors into this: autos, auto parts, pharmaceuticals, ports. It sees that these also are critical sectors where having China in the supply chain is not terribly helpful. So that negative list of decoupling is getting larger. But in the rest of the economy, as Mr. Besant says, he wants an integrated relationship so that small businesses in America can benefit from intermediate goods, cheap intermediate goods, goods for value which the Chinese export to the U.S. And of course, consumers will benefit.
Okay, Liang, very quickly, I've got about a minute left. Chinese exports rose 8.1% from last month, rather. That's compared to the year before that. Despite the fact that Chinese exports to the U.S. dropped by 21%. I mean, that shortfall was picked up mainly by exports to other countries around the world. So what does this tell us about China's trade potential?
Well, it just shows that, for one, China's exports are very competitive, and China is fully embedded in the global supply chain. So it's not just the final consumer good that China has been exporting, but really essential intermediate industrial products that other countries need. And second is China has been optimizing its trade partners. So as you mentioned, the 21% drop in the U.S. exports is made up more by the ASEAN countries' exports. And now ASEAN and EU are the top two trade partners with China, accounting for 16.8% and 12.6%. So I think that just shows that China will continue to be a really competitive exporter.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.